There's a strange point in life where everything looks fine, but something still feels off. You go through your day, you do what you're supposed to do, you handle your responsibilities. But underneath it all, there's this quiet feeling that something is missing. It's not dramatic, it's not overwhelming, it's just there. And no matter what you do, it doesn't fully go away. So naturally, your mind tries to fix it. Maybe I need more purpose. Maybe I need to change my life. Maybe I need to figure myself out. But here's what most people don't realize. That feeling isn't always a problem. Sometimes it's the beginning of realization. Most people feel this and immediately assume something is wrong with them. They try to tell themselves, I should be more grateful. I should be more motivated. I shouldn't feel like this. So they try to push it away. They distract themselves. They stay busy. They keep moving. But the feeling doesn't leave. It just gets quieter and deeper. So now you're living in two layers. On the outside, you function, but on the inside, you feel disconnected. You laugh, but you're not fully there. You achieve things, but it doesn't land. You rest, but it doesn't restore you. And this is why so many people feel tired in a way sleep can't fix. Because it's not just physical. Something deeper isn't being touched. And the more you ignore it, the more life starts to feel flat. Not because life lost its meaning, but because you've been living from a surface level of it. Now here's the shift. What if that feeling isn't telling you something is missing? What if it's showing you that what you've been relying on isn't enough? Most people interpret that emptiness as, I need more. More clarity, more answers, more direction. But what if that's the mistake? What if the feeling isn't asking you to add something, but to notice something that's already there? This is the paradox. The mind says, go find what is missing. Reality says, stop and notice what hasn't been missing. But the mind can't accept that, because the mind survives through searching. It always needs a next step, a solution, a destination. So it turns even this moment into another chase. But realization doesn't come from chasing. It begins when the chasing starts to lose its grip. Here's where things become more clear. Realization doesn't begin when everything makes sense. It begins when what used to make sense stops working. When distractions don't satisfy you the same way. When achievements don't land like they used to. When even your thoughts start to feel repetitive. That's not failure. That's disillusionment. And disillusionment is powerful. Because it breaks the illusion that something out there will complete you. You can improve your life and still feel off. You can gain knowledge and still feel disconnected. Because information isn't realization. Thinking about truth isn't the same as experiencing it. And this is where that feeling becomes important. It shows you that the mind has been trying to replace direct experience with constant interpretation. And after a while, interpretation starts to feel empty. So what feels like something is missing is actually your sensitivity returning. Now let's bring this into direct clarity. What you're starting to sense isn't something new. It's what has always been there, before the noise. The monad isn't something you find. It's what remains when the mind stops dividing everything. Before you label, before you interpret, before you search, there is just awareness. Simple, present, and undivided. And you've already felt this. In quiet moments, in pauses between thoughts, in those rare times when everything just stops for a second. No effort, no confusion, no need to figure anything out, just presence. That's why the mind misses it, because it's not dramatic. It doesn't feel like an achievement. It doesn't come with a label. It's just what's always been there. And that feeling of something missing, that's what happens when you've been living in constant mental movement and begin to sense what exists beyond it. The feeling itself isn't the problem. The story about it is. The mind says, something is missing, so go fix it. So you start chasing, and now you become the person trying to figure it out, the person trying to heal, or the person trying to arrive. And that identity keeps the feeling alive. Because now you're reinforcing the idea that you're not there yet. And that's the trap. The more you chase, the more distant it feels. Not because it's far away, but because the chasing creates the distance. You are not separate from what you're looking for. You never were. What's missing isn't reality. It's your clear recognition of it. And once you see that, the whole structure starts to loosen. So what does this look like in real life? It looks like waking up and feeling off for no clear reason. Or scrolling for stimulation because stillness feels uncomfortable. Or wanting change, but not knowing what would actually fix it. It looks like constantly trying to improve your life, but never quite feeling complete inside of it. But here's where the shift happens. The next time that feeling shows up, don't immediately try to fix it. Pause. Notice it without turning it into a problem. Watch how fast the mind tries to explain it. Watch how fast it wants a solution. And instead of following that, just come back to what's actually here. Your breath. Your body. The simple fact that you are aware right now. No story. No future. No past. Just this moment. That's not doing nothing. That's finally contacting reality directly. And from that place, life starts to feel different. Not because everything changes, but because you're no longer living entirely in the mind's version of it. So, that feeling that something is missing, well, it isn't always something to fix. Sometimes it's just the first moment you're no longer distracted enough to ignore what's real. It's where the illusion starts to weaken. It's where the search begins to break. It's where realization quietly begins. Not as a huge event, but as a simple recognition that what you've been looking for was never actually missing. It was only being overlooked. Something feels off. You're there, but not really there. You're talking, you're moving, you're doing everything you're supposed to do. But underneath it all, there's this quiet distance. Like you're slightly removed from everything, even from yourself. And no matter what you do, it never fully goes away. In this video, we're going to break down why you feel so disconnected from everything, and why this feeling isn't what you think it is. Because most people try to fix this by doing more, but that never actually works. Because this isn't a problem with your life. It's a shift in how you're experiencing it. And if you look closer, this disconnection might be the first moment you're actually seeing clearly. This feeling doesn't make logical sense. Nothing is necessarily wrong. Your life might even be going fine on the surface, but internally, it feels empty. It feels distant. It feels flat. So you try to engage with things the way you used to, but something is missing. And what's frustrating is, you can't even explain why. So your mind starts searching. What's wrong with me? Why don't I feel like I used to? Why does everything feel so disconnected? But every answer gives you something incomplete, because the mind is trying to solve something that it doesn't actually understand. So naturally, you try to fix the feeling. You distract yourself. You push harder. You try to feel something again. Maybe you scroll more. Maybe you talk more. Maybe you even do more. But the more you try, the more distant everything feels. Why? Because the disconnection isn't coming from a lack of stimulation. It's coming from something much deeper. You're starting to see that what you used to feel connected to was never as solid as you thought. And that realization creates space. And that space feels like disconnection. Here's what most people miss. This feeling didn't just appear randomly. Something changed. Not in your life, but in how you're perceiving it. There's a subtle shift happening. You're no longer fully immersed in the story. You're starting to see through it. And when that happens, the emotional intensity that used to keep everything feeling real begins to fade. Not because life lost meaning, but because you're no longer lost inside of it. That distance you feel, that's awareness, pulling back from identification. This shows up in ways you might not even recognize. You're in conversations, but part of you is just observing. You do things you used to enjoy, but they don't hit the same anymore. You feel emotionally muted, even when you think you should feel something. And your first instinct is to panic. Why can't I feel like I used to? But here's the truth. You're not losing connection. You're losing attachment. And there's a difference. Connection is natural. Attachment is forced. So instead of trying to go backwards, here's how you work with it. Stop trying to feel a certain way. Stop trying to recreate the past. Stop chasing intensity. Instead, pay attention to the quiet moments, the stillness underneath everything, the part of you that is aware of the disconnection itself. Because that part isn't disconnected at all. Look closer. This is the monad. That quiet awareness you keep overlooking. That's it. The thing that notices the distance, but isn't distant. The thing that observes the emptiness, but isn't empty. The thing that remains, no matter how you feel. That's what you've been calling disconnection. But it's not disconnection. It's the absence of noise. It's what's left when the usual filters start to fall away. You don't recognize it because it's not dramatic. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't try to be anything. It's just here. Unchanged. Silent and clear. So, if you've been feeling disconnected, don't rush to fix it. Don't label it as something wrong. Look closer. Because what feels like distance might be the first time you're not lost in everything around you. And in that space, there's something steady, something quiet, something that doesn't come and go. You've already noticed it. You just didn't realize what you were looking at. There was a time when thinking felt useful. You could analyze a problem, come up with a plan, and move forward. But now something has changed. Now the more you think, the worse it feels. The more you try to figure things out, the heavier everything becomes. You keep circling the same thoughts, the same questions, the same mental loops. And instead of clarity, all you get is exhaustion. So you start wondering what's wrong with you. Why can't you solve this? Why can't you get your mind to land anywhere? Why does every answer feel temporary? And why does every attempt at understanding leave you feeling even more disconnected? Because at a certain point, thinking stops being a tool and starts becoming the wall. This is where a lot of people are right now. They're not lazy. They're not unaware. They're not refusing to face reality. They are just mentally overextended. They have been using thought for everything. To interpret life, to control emotions, to create certainty. And for a while, it seems like it works. Until it doesn't. Until you realize your mind has become a machine that never turns off. You're brushing your teeth, and you're thinking. You're driving, and you're thinking. You're trying to rest, and you're thinking. Even when you try to enjoy something, you're still thinking. Nothing is technically wrong. Your system is still searching for the next issue to solve. That is why peace feels so distant. Not because peace is gone, but because your attention has been trained to stay in constant mental motion. And constant mental motion can never feel like rest. So no, you're not broken. You're just reaching the limit of what thought can do. The reason thinking is no longer helping you is because what you need right now cannot be reached through more thought. That sounds strange at first, because most people are trained to believe that every problem can be solved by better thinking. But that is only true for practical problems. Thinking can help you compare options. It can help you remember facts. It can help you build systems, organize tasks, and communicate ideas. But when the problem is internal noise, when the problem is disconnection, when the problem is the feeling that something is off in your life, thinking often multiplies the problem instead of solving it. Because thought keeps turning living experience into mental content. It keeps pulling you away from what is actually here. And commentary is not clarity. Commentary is just distance. You do not need more interpretation. You need direct contact. This is why some of your clearest moments came when you stopped trying so hard. Maybe it happened after you finally gave up on forcing an answer. Maybe it happened while you were staring out of a window. Or maybe it happened while you were doing something simple enough that your mind briefly loosened its grip. And for a moment, there it was. Relief. Not because you figured life out, but because you were no longer standing between yourself and life with nonstop interpretation. That is the part people miss. Clarity is not always something you think your way into. Sometimes clarity appears when the mental interference drops. Sometimes what you are searching for is already present, but your mind is too loud to notice it. And that is why more thinking is not helping you anymore. Not because you're failing, but because you're trying to use the wrong instrument for the kind of truth that you need. And this is where the deeper recognition begins. Underneath the noise, underneath the commentary, underneath the constant inner narration, there is something that has never been confused. There is an awareness beneath all the trying. It does not panic the way the mind panics. It does not spin the way the mind spins. It does not need to force understanding in order to exist. It is already here before the next thought appears. That silent, aware presence is closer to what you are than the mind's endless activity ever was. This is what people overlook. They keep trying to think their way back to themselves. But what they actually are has never been missing. The monad is not another thought to discover. It is not a concept to perfect. It is not a belief system you mentally adopt. It is the undivided reality underneath the fragmentation thought creates. And you felt it before. In the stillness after the noise. In the pause before reaction. In the brief moments where you were just here without trying to become anything. The illusion is not that thinking exists. The illusion is that thinking must lead everything. That without constant analysis, you will fall apart. That without nonstop mental management, life will collapse. That the mind must stay in control at all times. But look closely. Has all that control actually brought peace? Has all that overanalysis brought you into deeper contact with life? Or has it made you more hesitant, more drained, more split from yourself. Because when thought becomes excessive, it starts creating false distance. Distance between you and this moment. Distance between you and your body. Distance between you and other people. Distance between you and the simple truth of being here. Then life starts to feel dull, heavy, or unreachable. Not because life disappeared, but because thought stepped in front of it. The mind is useful, but it is a terrible substitute for direct experience. So what does this look like in your real life? It looks like sitting with someone you care about, but not really being there because your mind is somewhere else. It looks like turning free time into stress because you immediately start wondering what you should be doing. It looks like being unable to enjoy a good moment because part of you is already scanning for what might go wrong. It looks like reading, watching, learning, searching, and consuming endless content, hoping the next piece of insight will finally settle something inside of you. It looks like emotional exhaustion that is not just emotional. It is mental overuse. And here is the practical shift. You don't need to attack thought. You don't need to force your mind into silence. You don't need to win against thinking. You just need to stop treating every thought like a command. Let thoughts come and go without immediately climbing inside of them. Return to what is direct. Your breath, your body, the room you're in, the sounds that are around you, the fact that you are here before the next thought even forms. That is where the pressure starts to loosen, because you are no longer feeding the loop with full belief. You are remembering that awareness exists before mental noise. Thinking is not helping you anymore because you have reached the edge of what thought can give. And that is not a failure. That is an invitation. An invitation to stop trying to mentally manufacture the kind of peace that can only be recognized directly. An invitation to stop mistaking constant thought for intelligence. To stop mistaking mental effort for progress. To stop mistaking inner noise for truth. You do not need to think your way back to what you are. You only need to notice what remains when the mind is no longer being worshipped as the only guide. And what remains is not emptiness. It's presence. It's awareness. It's the quiet reality that was here before the struggle even began. There's a conflict happening inside of you right now, and it's exhausting. Not because life is too hard, but because something in you is fighting something deeper than you realize. Part of you wants peace, clarity, and stillness. But another part won't stop analyzing, questioning, and trying to figure everything out. And no matter how much you think, it never actually resolves. Because this isn't a thinking problem. This is a conflict between two completely different ways of experiencing reality. In this video, we're going to break down the real tension you've been feeling. The pull between the mind and something deeper than it. Because what feels like confusion, what feels like overthinking, what feels like internal chaos, is actually a signal. A signal that something deeper is trying to come forward. But the mind won't let go. And once you see this clearly, you stop trying to win the battle and start stepping out of it completely. The mind survives through control. It wants to label everything. It wants to define everything. It wants to predict what's coming next. Because control gives it a sense of safety. So when something in your life feels uncertain, the mind reacts immediately. It starts running scenarios, replaying conversations, trying to solve something that doesn't actually need solving. And for a moment, it feels productive, like you're getting somewhere. But in reality, you're not. Because the mind doesn't actually resolve uncertainty. It multiplies it. Every answer leads to another question. Every thought leads to another thought. And before you know it, you're stuck in a loop that never ends. Not because you're broken, but because the mind doesn't know how to stop. There's something else in you that doesn't need control at all. It doesn't need to label. It doesn't need to figure anything out. It's already complete. You felt it before. That moment when everything just quiets down. When you stop trying, and for a second, there's nothing missing. Nothing to fix. Nothing to chase. That's not something you created. That's what's always there when the mind isn't in the way. The monad isn't trying to solve your life. It's not trying to control anything. It's simply present. And in that presence, everything is already enough. So now you've got two completely different forces happening at once. The mind, trying to fix, control, and understand everything. And the monad, already whole, already still, already complete. And these two don't operate the same way at all. So when the monad begins to become more noticeable, the mind panics, because it feels like it's losing control. It interprets stillness as stagnation, presence as doing nothing, letting go as danger. So it ramps up. More thoughts, more analysis, more noise. And this is the moment where most people get pulled back into the loop, because they trust the noise more than the silence. This shows up in ways you already know. You're sitting there trying to make a decision, and your mind won't stop running possibilities. What if this goes wrong? What if I regret it? What if I'm missing something? So you keep thinking, trying to find certainty, but the more you think, the less clear you feel. Or you're in a conversation, and instead of actually being present, you're in your head the entire time, analyzing what to say, replaying what just happened, trying to control how you're perceived. And you leave feeling drained. Not because the moment was hard, but because you weren't actually there. Or maybe you finally get a moment to relax, and instead of feeling peace, your mind starts searching for problems, because it doesn't know how to exist without fixing something. And here's the truth most people miss. This isn't something you fix by thinking better. This is something you shift by stepping out of the mind entirely. The shift happens the moment you stop trying to resolve the mind with more thinking. Because that's the trap. You don't need to win against it. You don't need to silence it. You don't even need to control it. You just need to stop identifying with it. The thoughts can still be there, but you don't have to follow them. You don't chase them. You don't treat them like they're telling you something important. And in that moment, something opens up. Not dramatically, not like some big event, just quietly. You notice the space behind the thoughts, the awareness that's been there the whole time. That's the shift. Not creating something new, but recognizing what was never disturbed to begin with. The conflict you've been feeling was never something you were meant to solve, because it's not really a conflict at all. It's just the mind trying to maintain control, while something deeper in you is already at peace. In the moment you stop trying to fix the noise, you begin to notice the silence that was always there, not as something distant, but as what you already are. Most people think realization begins with some massive breakthrough, but that's not usually how it begins. More often than not, realization starts so quietly, so subtle, so easily overlooked, that you almost miss it completely. It begins in a moment that doesn't even look important. And the reason why so many people miss the beginning of realization is because they're waiting for something louder. You may have already felt this. A moment where your thoughts stopped pulling so hard. A moment where the pressure lifted for just a second. A moment where life felt strangely simple. And then almost instantly, the mind rushed in and tried to do something with it. It tried to explain it. It tried to label it. It tried to own it. So what was clear for 1 second became another thing to chase. That is why realization gets missed. Not because it's rare, but because it is so close, so ordinary, and so quiet that the mind doesn't even respect it. The mind is trained to value intensity. It believes truth must be dramatic. It believes that what matters must feel huge. But realization does not always enter like thunder. Sometimes it enters like silence. The moment realization starts is not usually when you gain something. It's when something unnecessary loosens. It's not when you become more spiritually advanced. It's not when you collect better ideas. And it's not when you force yourself into some higher state. It begins when the constant inner interference weakens just for a moment. That is why it can happen in a completely ordinary situation. Like sitting in your car before going inside, or looking out the window after a long day, or even washing your hands. And for 1 second, there is just this. No grand conclusion, no performance, no self-improvement project. Just direct experience without the usual noise on top of it. And that tiny shift matters more than most people realize. Because the beginning of realization is not the mind finally understanding truth. It's the beginning of seeing that truth was already here before the mind started talking about it. This is why so many people stand right at the edge of realization and walk right past it. Because what appears is so simple that it feels unimpressive. There's no mental fireworks. There's just a strange kind of obviousness. A sense that, for a brief second, nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to be solved. Nothing needs to be forced. And in that moment, life is not being filtered through the usual strain of becoming. You simply are here. That is what makes it so easy to miss. The mind is looking for an event, But realization often begins as recognition, not acquisition. It's not I found something new, but this was here before I started looking. That is why the first moment of realization can feel almost too plain, because it doesn't flatter the ego. It doesn't make the seeker feel special. It doesn't announce itself with a title. It simply reveals the quiet background that was always present. That still, aware, unforced presence beneath a mental movement. That's what I call the monad. It's not a concept. It's not a philosophy. It's not another belief to collect. It's the underlying wholeness that is already here before thought divides everything into pieces. The monad is not something the mind manufactures. It is what remains when the mind is no longer covering reality with constant interpretation. That brief stillness you almost ignored. That clear moment with no internal struggle. That sense of simple being before the mind rushed back in. That's it. That's the beginning of realization. And once that is noticed, even faintly, something has already changed. Maybe not dramatically, maybe not visibly, but the spell of total identification has started to crack. You begin to see that the endless mental commentary is not the foundation. It's just commentary. The illusion that keeps realization hidden is the belief that the truth must arrive as an object for the mind to grasp. No, because the mind only knows how to handle things by separating them. Me and the experience. Me and the truth. Me and my goals. Me and the realization I hope to have later. But the moment realization starts, that structure weakens. There's less distance, less grasping, less mental pressure. And because the ego thrives on distance and pursuit, it will often try to turn even that clear moment into another chase. It will say, how do I get that back? How do I keep it? What technique did I use that caused it? Was that my realization? How do I make this permanent? And just like that, the simplicity is covered again. Not because truth disappeared, but because the mind resumed its habit of turning life into a problem. This is why realization is often missed. It appears before the mind has time to build a system around it. And if you're not careful, the mind will convince you that the simplicity was insignificant just because it could not be controlled. So what does this look like in your real life? It looks like those brief moments where the pressure unexpectedly drops. You're overwhelmed, but then for 1 second, everything becomes strangely quiet. You're overthinking a relationship, and suddenly there is a pause where you see how much suffering is being created by your own mental grip. You're exhausted, and instead of forcing another answer, you just sit there. And in that simple sitting, there is more peace than in all of your efforts to fix yourself. Or you're outside, looking at the sky, and for one breath, there's no story about your life. There's only presence. That may seem small, but don't underestimate it. Because realization does not begin when life is perfect. It begins in the middle of an imperfect life, when you notice something untouched by the chaos. And here's the practical shift. Stop overlooking those moments just because they're quiet. Stop demanding that truth entertain you. Stop treating subtle clarity like it doesn't count. When the pause comes, don't immediately turn it into analysis. Notice it. Rest in it. Let it be enough without trying to convert it into a spiritual trophy. That's how sensitivity deepens. Not by forcing realization, but by not trampling the subtle beginning every time it appears. The moment of realization isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It's simple. It's unadorned. It's a pause that you nearly ignore. It's a moment without strain. It's a glimpse of being before the mind rushes in to reclaim control. That's why so many people miss it. They keep waiting for enlightenment to feel bigger, when in truth, the first real shift often feels smaller, simpler, and closer than expected. So pay attention. Not to the loud performances of the mind, but pay attention to the moments where nothing extra is needed. Because realization may already be beginning there, and you almost missed it. There's a part of you that is completely at peace, and another part of you that is never satisfied. One is silent, the other never shuts up. One doesn't need anything. The other always feels like something is missing. And most of your life has been shaped by the one who never stops talking. You felt this conflict more times than you can count. You tried to relax, but your mind won't let you. You try to feel content, but something inside you keeps pushing for more. Even when things are going well, there's still that underlying tension. I should be doing more. I'm not where I'm supposed to be. This isn't enough. And it doesn't matter what you accomplish. You hit a goal. You feel good for a moment. Then the feeling fades, and the voice comes back, telling you to chase the next thing, to fix the next flaw, to become a better version of yourself. And if you really look at it honestly, that voice has never actually led you to lasting peace. It just keeps you moving, constantly, relentlessly. What if that voice isn't actually helping you? What if the thing you've trusted your entire life to guide you is the very thing keeping you unsettled? Because if it were truly guiding you to peace, you would have arrived by now. But instead, you're stuck in a loop. And the more you listen to it, the more it reinforces the idea that something is missing, that you are not enough yet, that peace is always somewhere ahead of you, but never here. Now look at the moments where that voice disappears. Not in some big dramatic breakthrough, but in small, quiet moments you usually overlook. When you're sitting in your car after a long day, and you just stop for a second. When you're staring out of the window, not thinking, just watching. When you're walking through a park, and for a moment, you're not trying to get anywhere. In those moments, there's nothing wrong. No pressure, no comparison, no sense of lack. You're not trying to improve yourself. You're not trying to figure life out. And yet, there's a subtle sense of ease, a quiet completeness. Not because you added something, but because something stopped. That quiet completeness, that's the monad. Not something mystical or distant. Not something reserved for monks or spiritual seekers. It's the part of you that's already whole, already complete, already at rest. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't need progress. It doesn't need identity. It's what remains. It's what remains when the constant noise of becoming finally pauses. And the reason it feels so natural is because it is. You don't have to create it. You don't have to maintain it. It's always here, underneath the noise. The ego, on the other hand, can't exist in that silence. Because the ego is built on movement. It needs comparison to define you. It needs time to create a story. It needs problems to solve so it can stay relevant. Without those things, it has nothing to do. And if it has nothing to do, it starts to fade. So it keeps generating thoughts, keeps pulling you into analysis, keeps convincing you that something needs to be fixed. Because as long as you're engaged with it, it stays alive. That's why it feels so urgent, so convincing, and so real. But the moment you step back, even slightly, you start to see it for what it is. A process, not your identity. This isn't some abstract idea. You can see this playing out in your life constantly. You wake up, and before anything even happens, your mind starts planning, comparing, and worrying. You scroll through your phone, and suddenly feel like you're behind in life. You finish something important, but instead of resting, your mind immediately asks, what's next? You try to sit still and feel uncomfortable doing nothing. That's the ego maintaining momentum. Not because it's evil, but because that's all it knows how to do. Now here's where people get it wrong. They try to fight it. They try to silence it. They try to get rid of the ego. But that doesn't work. Because that's still the ego, trying to control itself. The real shift is simpler than that. You notice it. Not intellectually, but directly. You hear the voice, and instead of immediately believing it, you pause, even for a few seconds. You don't argue with it. You don't follow it. You just don't move with it. And in that pause, something opens. Not dramatically, not in some overwhelming way, but subtly. You feel a small gap, a moment where nothing is being pushed or pulled. And in that gap, there's no problem to solve, no identity to maintain, just presence. That's the monad, right there. Not as an idea, but as what's left when you stop chasing. The ego doesn't disappear overnight. It will keep speaking. It will keep trying to pull your attention. And that's fine. That's what it does. But now, you're starting to see it. And that changes everything. Because once you see it clearly, you stop automatically identifying with it. You stop believing every thought it produces. And in those moments where you don't follow it, you return to something that was never lost. Not something you created, but something that was always here, waiting underneath the noise. If this journey spoke to you, be sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone ready to experience life beyond thought. Comment below. What thought do you notice your mind repeating the most throughout the day? I read every comment. If you would like to support my work directly, you can do so at buymeacoffee.com/MagnumOpus333. Or you can explore some original merchandise at my Teespring store online. The link is in the description below. Remember, your consciousness is the key that unlocks reality. Let's keep unlocking it together. Thank you for watching. Until next time.